Next question. I recently got my master's from an Oxbridge college, just after racial bias training became mandatory for current and future students. Is a PhD worth the personal cost of speaking untruths?
Well,
Yeah.
this is a tough one. I have been saying to our children that in many ways, I don't think I could do what they must now do, living in a world in which untruths are so regularly deployed and with such force behind them. So I don't know what to make of this, because obviously there is a logic about living to fight another day. This is something it took me a long time to understand, but there's only so far you can go with that. And then the other thing is, if you decide, well, live to fight another day has to be the key rubric, because if you're going to accomplish something, you have to accomplish that first.
That's like the second half of "Is this the hill you want to die on?" Right? I mean, even if those don't emerge from the same thing, it's definitely, you can definitely put those two ideas together and make them sing.
Yeah, they are closely related. And the problem
If this
is,
isn't the hill you want to die on, then you're going to live to fight another day.
right, if the person asking you if that's the hill you want to die on is also holding a weapon, it's a very different thing. And so
Yes.
the
Good
the,
point.
the problem, I would say, is, none of us gets out alive. There probably is a hill you should therefore be willing to die on, right? There are important things in the world, and the preservation of your well-being is not ultimately viable, especially if you are part of a society that is committing obvious suicide, right? So the hill to die on is somewhere, and we all ought to find that hill. I don't know what to do. I have almost no doubt that I would not. I mean, I barely survived the PhD program we went through at the time, and this was not a component of the problem. So,
Yep, wasn't there.
no, it wasn't there. There were lots of other problems, and my, instinct to go after things that aren't right definitely got me in a lot of trouble, but it was scientific trouble. And, kind I'm proud of. I think the fights I chose were good ones, and I would still think that even if I hadn't finished. But nonetheless, I don't know what advice to give people going now, because on the one hand, the institutional structure is so broken that it's not obvious to me that having the degree and therefore the authority, or having the training and therefore the knowledge, is all that valuable in and of itself, because the programs are delusional in the first place for the most part. So,
well, I mean, that will obviously vary to some degree by discipline. And the problem more widely is, if this person says mandatory for current future students, so it's not clear if in this question racial bias training is mandatory in this field, for that department, or if it's college-wide.
yes.
Increasingly, these things are becoming college-wide, and we saw evidence, we saw yet more evidence this week from a couple of terrific pieces, one written by Barry Weiss, one written by Caitlin Flanagan, on what is happening to secondary ed, especially the elite private schools. And, it's whole institutions that are falling to this thing. But presumably the world does still need chemists. And, so I fear that art, which we need, will fall completely as a set of disciplines sooner than the STEM fields will, because airplanes will start falling out of the sky and bridges will start collapsing.
Well, but I mean, in some sense, this is my point, is we do absolutely need these things, not optional. And you cannot do it in a world where your relationship to the truth is held to be facultative as a matter of your survival. Therefore, we are facing an existential crisis. And that does not mean that it is clear that if you go into the field, that ultimately things sort out. The question is it necessary? If your point is actually chemistry is very, very important and we have to remain clear-headed about it, then the point is maybe that has to be fought outside. That if you go into the thing that it owns and therefore can force you to accept fiction,
that it wokeness, not it chemistry.
Correct. Chemistry having surrendered to wokeness, and I can speak less about what's going on in chemistry
But
than
biology, yeah.
yeah, but biology
Sure.
clearly has, right? Otherwise, there would be an uproar amongst biologists saying, actually, that nonsense that you're peddling over at Scientific American about us having gotten past the sexual binary is nonsense.
Yeah.
And,
No, and you get people who can legitimately say, how can you claim that sex is binary when all of these researchers and scientists and pediatricians and such say the other? Like, well, I can't explain them, but that doesn't make them right.
yeah. So what, this goes back to the idea of 0 being a special number, right? To the extent that there are not programs that we can point you to where the chemistry is free of wokeness, that tells you what battle we're involved in. We're in a battle in which there can be no program in which chemistry is not afflicted by wokeness, because if there was, it would obviously be the top program. And therefore, if the outsiders can race to the front of the race just simply by not being crazy, then the point is that cannot be allowed, which is actually
Therefore, we go after merit.
Right, which is quite viewable in the attack on Substack this week. So there are now calls to
I don't know this.
Substack censor its journalists. And the point is, well, we can't very well have a game in which all of the mainstream outlets have to say these crazy wrong things if there are a bunch of people who are liberated to go to the audience directly and say true things, because, of course, they will be the only game in town. So how can they not be the only game in town? We're going to have to deplatform them.
So I didn't know that had happened. I met with the 2 founders of Substack a few years ago, back before really almost anyone had heard of them, and they flew up here to talk to me about whether or not I wanted to start one. And I was thinking about it, and I ended up not, and I still don't have one, as you know. But I specifically asked them. I think this was right after the kerfuffle with Patreon over Sargon of Akkad, and I was thinking, okay, maybe not Patreon, maybe Substack. I tend to want to put out more written content anyway than video content. And I was really impressed with these 2 guys, but I asked them specifically, what will your policy be in censorship space? And they didn't hedge a lot, but they hedged just a tiny bit. And I felt it was not that is the reason that I didn't end up creating a Substack. I didn't want, at that point, I think we had maybe just gotten our book contract. I didn't want to feel confined to be writing something on a regular basis for a different audience. But I remember the 3 of us having a conversation that I think was good on all fronts, in which I said, you will want to be very clear up front with this, because it will come for you.
Yes, it will come for you. The question is, what do you say? Because, of course, you don't want to set up a policy that allows people to put truly dangerous, possibly illegal, whatever it is. So you need to set up a rule that explains how discretion will be wielded and what will be protected. But that, I don't envy anybody who has to write that policy and then face the consequences. It's not a simple matter.
I agree.